The moment Lyric Halloran heard the front door close behind him for the last time, she understood that some endings don't arrive with screaming. They arrive with the quiet click of a brass latch and the smell of his cologne fading from a hallway he would never walk again. She stood in the kitchen of the house they had shared for 6 years, holding a coffee mug she had bought on their honeymoon in Portugal, and listened to the engine of his car start in the driveway. He didn't rev it. He didn't peel away. He simply reversed. Slow and deliberate, the way a man drives when he has already mourned the thing he is leaving. On the marble counter beside her sat the note. 3 sentences. No signature. I can't keep pretending. The accounts are in my name. Don't try to find me. That was the part that broke something in her chest. The small surgical cruelty of, don't try to find me. As if she were the one who had done something wrong. As if 6 years of building a life around a man's silences had been a crime she'd committed against him. Lyric set down the mug. Her hand was steady. That surprised her more than anything. Outside, December rain fell against the windows of the house in Bellpoint Hollow, the gated community where every lawn was a performance and every neighbor knew the script. By morning, they would all know. She walked to the bedroom. His side of the closet was empty, the kind of empty that takes weeks to plan. The Italian shoes, the watches, the cufflinks his mother had given him at their wedding. Gone. He had been preparing this for months while she had been making him dinners and asking him about his day. She walked to the bathroom and looked at herself in the mirror, and for the first time in 6 years, she let herself really look. The woman staring back was 34 years old. Dark hair, longer than she remembered choosing. Eyes the color of wet slate, with circles beneath them she had stopped seeing. She looked at this stranger who had been wearing her face, and she said one thing aloud, quietly, like a verdict. You let him do this to you? Then, something in her changed. Not loudly, not with tears. With the cold, clarifying calm of a woman who has finally run out of lies to tell herself. Before you hear what happened to Lyric Halloran in the 72 hours that followed, the hours that stripped her down to nothing, and then handed her something far more dangerous than the life she had lost. Do me a small favor. Drop a comment with the city you're watching from tonight. I want to see how far this story reaches. And if you stay until the end, you'll understand why a woman who lost everything became the one woman in this city no man would ever dare touch again. Hit the like button. Let's begin. She did not yet know the name of the man who would, 3 days from now, walk into the worst night of her life and make a single phone call that would rearrange the architecture of her entire future. She did not yet know that across the city, in a study lined with leather books and silence, that man had already heard her name spoken once, by someone who should not have spoken it. She only knew, standing in the bathroom of the house she could no longer afford, that the woman in the mirror was done apologizing for taking up space in her own life. She turned off the light and walked into the dark. By Tuesday morning, Lyric understood the shape of what her husband had done. The joint checking account drained, the savings transferred. The credit cards in her name canceled, everyone, with the patient efficiency of a man who had hired a lawyer long before he had written a goodbye note. The house was in his name. The car was leased through his company. The phone in her hand was on his plan, and at 9:47 a.m. it stopped ringing out as service was cut. She sat on the kitchen floor in her bathrobe and laughed. It was not a healthy laugh. It was the laugh of a woman who had just realized that the man she had loved had been studying how to erase her for longer than she had been studying him. Her name was Lyric Mireille Halloran. Before that, before him, it had been Lyric Mireille Vasco. She had been a translator once, 3 languages, a degree from a small but serious university back east. She had given that up the year they married because his career required a wife who could host, and you could not host dinners for senior partners while running a video call with a pharmaceutical company in Lyon. She had told herself, at the time, that she was choosing him. that love was a kind of generous shrinking. Now she understood what she had actually been doing. She had been disappearing in installments, paying him in pieces of herself, and the man had taken every payment without ever once asking her to keep something for herself. By Tuesday afternoon, 2 men in suits arrived at the gate. They were polite the way executioners are polite. The house, they explained, was being placed on the market. She had until Friday to remove personal belongings. Mr. Halloran filed in another county on Monday morning. You'll be served formally within the week. He had filed before he left. Of course he had. She did not cry in front of them. She nodded, signed nothing, and closed the door. And only when their car had pulled out did she lean her forehead against the wood and let her shoulders shake, just once, in a tremor she would not have called weeping. By Tuesday night she had packed a single suitcase, the old canvas bag from her university years. Into it, 3 changes of clothes, the small wooden box that held her grandmother's rosary and a photograph of her father, her old laptop from before the marriage, 2 books she had read so many times their spines were soft, and the coffee mug from Portugal, because some things you do not leave for strangers to throw away. She left her wedding ring on the kitchen counter beside his note. The absence was the statement. By Wednesday morning, she was in a motel 2 highway exits east of the city, the kind where the woman behind the front desk did not ask questions, and the door did not quite close, flush against the frame. It cost $41 a night. She had $312 in cash, withdrawn from an emergency envelope she had hidden inside a hollowed-out copy of Anna Karenina years ago, on instinct, for reasons she had never fully named to herself. She had been preparing for this without knowing she was preparing. For 3 days she did almost nothing. She slept. She ate from a vending machine. She walked the frontage road in the cold. She did not call her sister. She did not call her mother. She wanted, before she reached for any rope, to know what she was capable of holding herself. On the 3rd evening, sitting on the edge of the motel bed, she opened the small wooden box, the rosary, the photograph of her father, who had died when she was 11. And folded beneath them, something she had forgotten was there, a business card, cream paper. A single name embossed in dark green ink. A phone number, no address. 3 years ago, at a charity event her husband had insisted she attend, an older woman had pressed this card into her palm in the powder room. The woman had looked at her, really looked, in the way Lyric had not been looked at in years, and said very quietly, "When the ground gives out beneath you, and it will, my dear, you call this number. Not before." She had hidden the card in the box because hiding it had felt important, the way certain instincts feel important before you have language for them. She turned it over now in the lamplight. Outside, a truck passed on the highway. Somewhere across the city, a phone was about to ring in a room she could not yet imagine, in front of a man whose name she did not yet know. Lyric picked up the motel phone. She dialed. The phone rang twice. A woman's voice, low and unhurried, said only, "Yes." Not hello. Just that single syllable, weighted with the patience of someone who had been answering this number for a very long time. "My name is Lyric Halloran," she said. Then, because she was done with that name already, Lyric Vasco. 3 years ago, a woman gave me this card. She told me to call when the ground gave out. "Where are you?" Lyric told her. "Do not leave the room. Do not order food to the door. Do not open the door for anyone except a woman who introduces herself as Renska. She will be there in 40 minutes. Are you injured? No. Are you being followed? I don't know." Then assume yes until told otherwise. The line went dead. 41 minutes later, there was a soft 3-knuckle knock at the door. The woman in the hallway was perhaps 50, perhaps 60. She wore a charcoal coat that fit her the way armor fits a knight. Her hair was the color of pewter, cut short. Her eyes were very still. "Renska, may I come in?" It was not a question. She entered. She looked once around the room. The suitcase, the wooden box, the Portugal mug. And Lyric watched her catalog all of it in under 3 seconds. Tell me what happened. The shortest version. I do not need the feelings yet. I need the facts. So Lyric told her. The note, the drained accounts, the men at the gate, the frozen assets, the filing in another county. Renska listened without interrupting. Your husband. His full name. Calder Halloran. Something almost imperceptible shifted in Rensky's face. It was not surprise. It was the opposite of surprise. Pack your things. We are leaving in 3 minutes. Where are we going? Somewhere you can sleep without checking the door. I don't have money for... You have not been asked for money. Lyric stood. Her hands, which had been so steady, were now trembling. She put the wooden box back into the canvas bag. She picked up the mug and wrapped it in a sweater. Why are you helping me? Rensky paused at the door. Because 31 years ago, a man left me with nothing in a town I did not know, and a woman I had never met handed me a card. I have been passing that card to others ever since. The car waiting outside was black, unremarkable, and expensive in a way that was deliberately quiet. The driver did not speak. As they pulled onto the highway, Lyric watched the lights of the motel shrink in the side mirror and felt something inside her that had been holding its breath finally exhale. They drove for almost an hour, out of the suburbs, past the edge of the city, up into the ridge of low forested hills where the wealthy old families of the region had built their houses a century before any gated community had been invented. The car turned onto a private road, then through a wrought iron gate that opened without anyone speaking to it, and finally up a long, crushed stone drive that curved through cedars to a stone house lit from within by a warm, low light. The house was not enormous. It was something more unsettling than enormous. It was built well. Whose house is this? This house belongs to a man named Aurelio Dravek, Rensky said. You will not have heard his name spoken in your circles. That is by design. In this city there are men who appear in newspapers, and there are men whose names appear in the silences between the sentences in newspapers. He is the second kind. Lyric's pulse began to climb. What does he do? He keeps order. In a city that has none. The car stopped. A man in a dark suit opened the door. Lyric stepped onto the gravel and felt the cold of the night settle on her face like a hand. Why am I here? Truly. Why this house? Why this man? Renska looked at her for a long moment. Because when I told him your husband's name on the phone 20 minutes ago, he stopped speaking for almost a full minute. And in the years I have worked for him, my dear, I have never once heard Aurelio Dravek go silent. The front door opened. Warm light spilled across the stone steps. And somewhere inside that house, a man Lyric had never met was already waiting for her. A man who, it would turn out, had known her husband's name for far longer than she had. The foyer smelled of cedar smoke and old paper. Rensky walked ahead of her down a corridor lined with oil paintings of landscapes. No portraits. A man who hangs landscapes instead of faces is a man who does not want to be reminded of the people he has known. At the end of the corridor, Rensky pressed her palm to a panel beside a set of dark double doors, and they opened inward without sound. He will see you alone. If you need me, say my name once. He will hear you. Lyric walked into the study. The doors closed behind her. A fire burned in a stone hearth. Bookshelves rose floor to ceiling, packed not with the matched leather-bound performances of wealthy men, but with the cracked, mismatched, well-handled spines of a person who actually read. He was standing at the window with his back to her. Tall, but not theatrically so. Dark sweater, dark trousers, no jewelry. His hair was black with a small amount of gray at the temples. He did not turn when she entered. Sit. Please, Mrs. Halloran. His voice was quieter than she had braced for. There was an accent in it, very faint, smoothed by decades. "Vasco," she said. Now he turned. His face had been hard once and had since been weathered into something else. His eyes were the color of cold tea. He gestured toward a chair near the fire. "Vasco," he repeated, and there was the faintest movement at the corner of his mouth, not quite a smile. "Forgive me. I will not make that error again." She sat. He walked to a side table, poured something amber from a decanter, and set the glass beside her chair. "Drink it or do not. It is not a test." Then he sat across from her, and the firelight moved on his face. "Renska told me," Lyric said, "that when she said my husband's name to you on the phone, you stopped speaking for almost a full minute." "She should not have told you that." "She told me anyway." "Yes." A pause. "She has her own ideas about what people need to know. They are usually correct, and they are always inconvenient." "Why did you stop speaking?" He studied her over the rim of his glass. "Because for 2 years and 3 months, your husband has owed a great deal of money to a man who works for me. He has been paying the interest. He has not been paying the principal. 3 weeks ago, he stopped paying the interest. Last Friday, my associate informed me that Calder Halloran had liquidated certain assets and was preparing to disappear. Tonight, when Renski said your name, I understood. He is not running from me, Mrs. Vasco. He is running from you, and using me as the reason he can give to himself." Lyric did not move. She had walked into this room thinking she was a woman whose husband had abandoned her. She was now sitting in the home of a man who had just informed her that her marriage had been a structure built on top of a pit she had never been told existed. "How much?" He named a figure. It was larger than the value of the house in Bell Point Hollow. "For what?" she whispered. "That is a question I do not answer to anyone who is not party to the original transaction. I will only say this. It was not for a business. It was not for an investment. It was for the satisfaction of an appetite he believed his wife did not need to know about." She closed her eyes. She did not cry, but she felt something break very quietly inside her chest, the last small private hope that her marriage had been at least an honest failure, rather than a long, slow theft. When she opened her eyes, Aurelio was watching her without pity. He was watching her the way a doctor watches a patient receive a diagnosis, with full attention, leaving her the dignity of her own reaction. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because in 3 days, perhaps 4, men I do not control will come looking for your husband. Some will begin to ask whether his wife knows where he has gone. Some will not ask politely. Renska brought you here because the card she gave you 3 years ago was not a card for women who had been left. It was a card for women who had been left by men like your husband. There is a difference, and the difference is the reason you are still alive tonight." Her hand lifted the amber glass to her mouth. She drank. It burned. She welcomed the burn. "What do you want from me?" He set down his own glass, untasted, and leaned forward slightly. "That is the wrong question, Mrs. Vasco. It is the question every woman in your circumstance has been trained to ask, and it is the question that has cost most of them what little they had left to lose. The correct question is the one I am going to ask you instead." He paused. "What do you want?" She did not answer him that night. She could not. The question had landed somewhere beneath language, in the part of her that had been silent so long it had forgotten it was allowed to speak. The east room was on the 2nd floor. The bed was high and made up in unbleached linen. The window looked out over the dark cedars. On the small writing desk, someone had placed folded clothes in roughly her size. A hairbrush, a new toothbrush, and a single pear in a white ceramic bowl. The pear undid her. She sat on the edge of the bed and finally, properly, wept. Not for Calder. Not for the house. Not for the wedding ring she had left on a counter for a stranger to find. She wept because someone she had never met had remembered, in the middle of arranging her safety, that a woman who had not eaten a real meal in 3 days might want a piece of fruit. She slept for 14 hours. When she woke, instead of panic, she felt something she had not felt in 6 years. She felt rested. She bathed in a tub that smelled faintly of bergamot, dressed in clothes that fit her exactly, and looked at herself in the mirror for the second time in 4 days. The woman in the mirror was still tired, still thin, but something had returned to her face that had been missing for a long time. It took her a moment to name it. It was attention. Her own attention, looking back at her. In the 8 days that followed, Lyric Vasco began, very slowly, to remember who she had been before she had been somebody's wife. Renska, it turned out, was not only a woman who answered phones. She had been, in some earlier life, a lawyer in a country whose name she did not give. On the second morning, she laid out a folder containing every public record of Calder Halloran's financial activity over the last 4 years. The shell companies, the second account in another state, the property in another woman's name, purchased 2 years into the marriage. "I would like to learn how to read these properly," Lyric said. "Not just look at them. Read them. Then you will." In the mornings, Renska taught her how to read a corporate filing, how to follow money through 3 jurisdictions. Lyric had a quick mind. It was only that nobody had asked it to do anything in 6 years, and it came back to her now with the slightly stiff gratitude of a limb that has been splinted too long. In the afternoons, she walked the grounds. There were paths through the cedars, a glass house with citrus trees, a low stone bench where she began to sit each day at the same hour, watching the light change on the hills. On the 3rd afternoon, a young woman appeared on the path with a basket and introduced herself as Soraya, the cook's daughter. "Renske said you used to translate. From which languages, if I may ask?" "French, Portuguese, a little Czech." Soraya's face lit. "I am studying Portuguese. May I sometimes speak it with you?" Lyric heard herself laugh. A small laugh, rusty, surprising to her own ears. "Yes, please." That night, when she returned to her room, she found on the writing desk a stack of 3 books, in Portuguese, with a note in handwriting she did not yet recognize but would come to, "In case you would like to read again." A. She sat on the bed and held the books in her lap and understood, with a clarity that was almost frightening, that no one had given her a book in 6 years. Aurelio Dravec was, with deliberate and patient hands, returning her to herself piece by piece, her language, her mind, her body, her appetite, her attention. And he was doing it without asking her for anything in return. Not gratitude, not affection, not an answer to the question he had asked her by the fire. She did not know yet whether this was kindness or strategy. She suspected, even then, that it was both. On the 8th evening, Renska came to her room and said, "He would like to speak with you, if you are willing." Lyric was willing. She found him in the library. He stood when she entered, gestured to the chair drawn up to face his own, and waited until she sat before he sat himself. "There is an event in 9 days," he said, without preamble. "It is held every winter in this city by a family called the Yarrow Field Trust. On the surface, a charity gala for a children's hospital. Beneath the surface, the night each year on which the city's most powerful families confirm to each other that they are still its most powerful families. Your husband and his employer have attended every year for the last 6. Your husband will not attend this year, because by then, he will have been located by people I do not control." Lyric understood the sentence. She did not flinch. That, too, surprised her. His employer will attend. So will several men who were aware, in varying degrees, of what your husband had been doing with their money. They will be looking, on that night, for any sign that the chaos of his disappearance has touched the rest of the city. They will be looking, in particular, for you. Because if you appear distressed, or hidden, or under another man's protection, they will read it as weakness. And weakness in this city is an invitation. And if I do not appear at all, then they will hunt for you, and they will find you, because they always do. She looked at the fire. So you would like me to appear? I would like nothing of you, Mrs. Vasco. I have told you that. What I am offering you is a choice. You may stay in this house, and I will keep you in it as long as you wish. You will be safe. You will also, eventually, be smaller. The walls of a safe house grow inward over time. I have watched it happen to women braver than either of us. And the other choice? The other choice is that you walk into the Yarrowfield Gala on my arm, and you let every man in that room understand, in the space of one evening, that you are no longer a woman they may speak about in the past tense. The fire cracked in the hearth. Why your arm? Because in this city, the only thing more dangerous than my name is the word no spoken in my presence. No man in that room will ask a question of a woman standing beside me. Not on that night. Not ever again, if we do this correctly. And in return, you owe me nothing. Not before, not during, not after. The arm is not a contract, Mrs. Vasco. It is a sentence. One night long. Read by men who can read. She sat with it. She thought of the woman in the bathroom mirror 4 nights ago, the one she had called by a verdict. She thought of the pear in the white bowl. She thought of Calder, who was somewhere in the world tonight believing he had successfully erased her. She thought of every dinner she had hosted for senior partners, every conversation she had not joined, every opinion she had swallowed because it was easier than watching his jaw tighten. Yes, she said. Aurelio inclined his head, very slightly. Then we have 9 days. There is much to be done. She walked back to her room through the long, quiet corridors of his house, and she did not sleep that night until almost 3 in the morning, because for the first time in 6 years she was lying in the dark thinking not about what she had lost, but about what she was about to do. And somewhere, in a city she would walk into in 9 days as a woman no man would dare to interrupt, the men who had once spoken her name carelessly were already, without knowing it, rehearsing the silence they were about to learn. The 9 days passed, the way a held breath passes, slowly at first, then all at once. There was no makeover. That was the thing that mattered most. Aurelio did not summon stylists. On the second morning, he simply asked her, in the quiet way he asked everything, whether she had any thoughts about what she might wear. I would like to wear something of my mother's, she said. A coat. She wore it once to a wedding I was too young to remember. It has been in a closet in Oregon for as long as I have been alive. Aurelio nodded. It will be here in 2 days. It arrived on the 4th morning. The coat was the deep, bruised color of a winter plum, cut long, with sleeves narrow at the wrist. Her mother had worn it the year before her father died. The only photograph Lyric had of her mother truly happy. The man for whom she had worn it had not lived to see her wear it twice. It fit her almost exactly. It needed only a small alteration at the shoulder. The dress beneath it Lyric chose herself, a simple column of dark wine-colored silk that made no claims and required none. For her hair, she did nothing elaborate. She wore it down, the way her mother had worn it in that single old photograph, and Lyric had decided sometime around the 3rd night that she would walk into the Yarrowfield Gala wearing the body of a woman whose mother had once been loved. The other days she spent learning. Rensky walked her through the guest list. 46 families, 280 individuals. Lyric memorized the names, the alliances, the feuds. She learned the name of the man Calder had owed money to, Damaris Velacourt, an importer of antiquities whose import business had not, for many years, been primarily about antiquities. He will be there, Renska said. He has had your photograph on a desk for 3 weeks. What will he do when he sees me on Aurelio's arm? Renska's mouth moved, not quite into a smile. He will understand the sentence, and he will not finish his drink. On the morning of the gala, Lyric woke before dawn and walked the cedar paths in the cold. She thought about her father, who had been a quiet man and a good one. She said to herself, "You let him do this to you. You will not let anyone do it again." That evening she did her own face, a little color at the lip, almost nothing at the eye. She fastened a single thin chain of her grandmother's at her throat. She put on the coat. When she walked down the great staircase, Aurelio was waiting in the foyer in a black suit cut by someone who understood that the point of a suit on a man like him was to make people forget they were looking at a suit. He looked at her once and said only, "Your mother had good taste." "She had one good year," Lyric said. "I am borrowing it." He almost smiled. He offered his arm. The drive into the city took 34 minutes. They did not speak. The Yarrowfield estate sat on the highest of the river bluffs, a stone manor lit from the inside as if it were a lantern raised against the dark. Photographers had been allowed only as far as the outer gate. The men with cameras at the inner steps were not press but something else. None of them lifted a camera. At the top of the wide stone steps, just before the great doors, he paused. "You may change your mind even now. I will turn the car around. No one will know." "Aurelio," she said, and it was the first time she had used his name aloud to his face. "Open the door." He opened the door. The Yarrowfield ballroom was a long, high-ceilinged room of pale stone and dark beams, lit by chandeliers hung when electricity was still a novelty. 200 people stood in clusters along its length. The smell of warm wax and white flowers. Lyric walked into the room on Aurelio's arm. The murmur did not stop all at once. It stopped in waves, the way wind moves across a wheat field. First, the people nearest the entrance, then the cluster around the bar, then, last, the small knot of men standing near the fireplace at the far end, who turned as a single body to look, and one of whom, silver-haired, narrow-shouldered, holding a glass of something pale, went very still. Damaris Velacourt. He had not finished his drink. Aurelio did not pause. He walked her the full length of that ballroom at exactly the pace he would have walked it alone, and Lyric kept her chin level and her eyes ahead, and she felt the room reading the sentence Aurelio had promised it would read, word by word, from the door to the fire. By the time they reached the fireplace, the room had remembered how to breathe, but not yet how to speak. Aurelio inclined his head, half an inch, toward Damaris. "Damaris. Aurelio." The voice was steady. The hand holding the glass was not. "You know Mrs. Vasco, I believe?" A long pause. Damaris's eyes moved from Aurelio's face to Lyric's, and she watched him calculate every possible response and discard each in turn. "I have not had the pleasure," he said finally. "You have now," said Aurelio. And he turned, and he walked Lyric away, and behind them the silence of the Yarrowfield ballroom rearranged itself permanently around the new fact of her existence. Dinner was served at 9. The Yarrowfield Gala seated its guests along 3 long oak tables that ran the length of the smaller hall behind the ballroom, a deliberate piece of theater, because a long table required everyone to see everyone. Lyric was placed at the center table, 3 seats from its head. The head was held by Honora Yarrowfield herself, the matriarch of the host family, 81 years old, dressed in dove gray. To her right sat Aurelio. To Aurelio's right sat Lyric. Across from Lyric, 3 feet away over a low arrangement of white camellias, sat Damaris Velacourt. Beside Damaris sat his wife Pell, who wore diamonds that did not suit her. And beside Pell sat a younger woman with a hard, beautiful face. Lyric knew her by the way Damaris's hand rested briefly on hers as they were seated. Too briefly to be familial, too easily to be an affair of fewer than 2 years. Rensky had not mentioned this woman by name during the briefings. Lyric understood. In the second she registered the gesture. Why? Because the woman across from her was the woman in whose name Calder Halloran had purchased a property 2 years into his marriage to Lyric. She was looking at her husband's mistress. And her husband's mistress was, it appeared, also Damaris Velacourt's. Lyric's hand did not move on the stem of her wine glass. Aurelio said nothing, but she felt him slide his arm a fraction closer to hers along the back of her chair, in a gesture that was not protective so much as it was present. The first course was served, a clear broth with a single white blossom floating in it. Pell asked Lyric, with a sweetness that had been sharpened on a stone, how long she had known Aurelio. Long enough. How mysterious. It isn't, really. It only sounds that way to people who have not been asked. The younger woman beside Damaris leaned forward and said, with a smile that was almost professional, Mrs. Halloran, isn't it? I believe we have a friend in common. Vasco. I'm sorry? My name is Vasco. I have not been Mrs. Halloran for some time. Honora Yarrowfield at the head of the table did not look up from her broth, but the corner of her mouth moved by perhaps a millimeter. Of course, the younger woman said. Forgive me, and our friend in common, Calder, I mean. I had heard he was traveling. Have you been in touch? This was the moment. Lyric understood it as it arrived. Aurelio could have rescued her with a single sentence, and he was deliberately choosing not to. He was leaving the table to her. It was the most generous and the most demanding thing a man had ever done in her presence. She set down her spoon. Calder is not traveling. Calder is hiding. He is hiding from a man who loaned him money he did not earn to spend on appetites he did not pay for, in the company of women whose names he did not give me. I have spent the last 17 days learning the full geometry of what my husband was. I will spend the next year of my life unlearning the woman I had to become in order not to see it. I would not, however, recommend that anyone at this table waste energy pretending he is reading a book on a beach. He is not. And if any of you are tempted to send word to him on the chance that he is reading his messages, I would ask you to send only this, that his wife is well, that his wife is finally, at 34 years old, well, and that if he ever speaks her name again in any room in this city, he will discover that there are now rooms in this city he is not permitted to enter. She lifted her spoon again. She resumed her broth. The silence that followed was not the kind that ends. It was the kind that is filed. It was the silence of 200 people understanding, all at once, that they had just witnessed the seam at which a story changed direction. Pell set down her wineglass without drinking from it. The younger woman across the camellias had gone the color of paper. Damaris looked at Aurelio. Aurelio looked back. Neither man spoke. At the head of the table, Honora finally lifted her eyes. She looked, for one long moment, at Lyric Vasco in her mother's plum coat, and the corner of her mouth moved again, and this time it was unmistakable. Miss Vasco, said Honora in a voice that carried the length of the table without rising. You will sit beside me at the dessert course. I find I have a great many questions, and very little time in which to ask them. Lyric sat beside Honora Yarrowfield at the dessert course for 90 minutes. What was said between them was not what mattered. What mattered was that Honora, the matriarch whose disapproval had ended 4 marriages and 3 political careers in the previous decade alone, leaned her head close to Lyric's ear at one point and listened, smiling faintly to whatever Lyric said in return, and the room watched, and the room understood. By the time the dessert plates were cleared, Lyric had been spoken to, with deference, by 11 separate women who had not previously known her name. She had been offered the personal cards of 2 of them. She had been invited by Honora herself to call upon the Yarrowfield offices in the second week of the new year to discuss a matter of mutual interest. Aurelio she did not see for almost an hour. He had been pulled into one of the side rooms, the kind of room where men like Damaris Velacourt go to confirm to other men, in fewer sentences than would be polite at a dinner table, what has changed and what has not. When he returned to her, finally, near the great fireplace at the back of the hall, his face was unreadable. It is done. What is done? Damaris will not look for your husband. Damaris will, in fact, retract the loan. The principal will be written off in his books as a private matter that was settled privately. Your name will not appear in any conversation the men in this house have for the rest of their lives, except in the form of Mrs. Vasco, said quietly, by men who have not forgotten what they saw at this table tonight. And Calder? Aurelio looked at her for a long moment. Calder is a problem that has, in the last 3 hours, become a problem you no longer have to solve. There are men in this country who, when they understand that a woman is no longer an opportunity, lose interest in her permanently. Calder Halloran has just been informed, through channels he respects, that you are no longer an opportunity. He will not contact you again. He will, in fact, expend whatever life he has left, avoiding any city in which you are known to keep an address. She nodded slowly. She did not feel triumph. What she felt was a low, settled gravity, the weight of a life she had just retaken possession of. There is something else, she said. Yes. The woman across the table. There is a property purchased 2 years into my marriage, in her name. With money that came, I now understand, from your associate's books. I would like that property signed over to me. Quietly. Within 30 days. Aurelio looked at her, and for the first time in the 17 days she had known him, he laughed. A single low sound at the back of his throat. It will be done in 14. And Mrs. Vasco, I would like to say something to you now that I will not say again, because I do not, as a rule, repeat sentences of this kind. Yes. I have spent 30 years in rooms full of men who confused volume with power. You walked into this room tonight on the arm of a man whose name is the loudest silence in this city. You were not the silence beside me. You were the sentence. She did not answer. She did not need to. They left the Arrowfield estate at 1 in the morning. The driver, who had not spoken to her once in 17 days, looked at her in the rearview mirror as she settled into the seat and inclined his head, half an inch. She had been seen by a driver who had not seen her before. Somewhere near the river, where the road climbed back out of the valley, Aurelio's gloved hand moved, slowly, deliberately, until the back of it rested against the back of hers on the seat between them. He did not curl his fingers around hers. He did not look at her. She did not move her hand away. For almost 6 full minutes they drove like that, in a silence that was no longer a silence between strangers. By the time the car pulled through the wrought iron gate, Lyric understood 3 things. She understood that she was not going back to the woman in the bathrobe on the kitchen floor. She understood that the man beside her had not chosen her tonight to make a point to a city. He had let the city watch him choose her because he had already, quietly, in his own private accounting, chosen her some days before. And she understood that the next morning she was going to walk downstairs and tell him she would like to begin, on her own terms, the long, unhurried work of letting herself be loved by a man who had never once asked her to be smaller than she was. She did not yet know that across the city, in a study she would never see, a silver-haired man was setting down a glass he had still not finished, and quietly, to the empty room, saying her name aloud for the first time, the way men say the names of things they will never again attempt to take. By morning, the sentence had traveled. It traveled through the older, faster network of telephone calls between women who had stood near the fireplace and women who had not been invited but who needed, by 10 in the morning, to know exactly what had happened. By noon, 3 separate versions of Lyric's words at the broth course were circulating. By 2, the versions had collapsed into one because Honora Yarrowfield had, at 11 that morning, telephoned 2 specific people and corrected the record. And when Honora corrected the record stayed corrected. The woman in whose name Calder Halloran had bought a property had left the city by the 8:15 flight. Her seat at every dinner table she had previously occupied was, by lunchtime, no longer hers. Pell Velcourt had filed for separation by 3. Damaris had not been seen leaving his house all day, and would not be seen. The staff at his office quietly understood, for at least a week. Lyric learned all of this from Renske, who delivered it the way Renske delivered everything, without commentary, in the order of importance, while Lyric ate eggs and toast in the bright morning room. Lyric did not break. What she felt instead was a homecoming to a self she had not known was waiting. Renske, I would like to speak with him this morning. He has been free since 6. He has been waiting in the library. The fire was already lit. He stood when she entered and waited until she sat before. He sat himself. I have things to say. Some of them are practical. Some of them are not. Begin in any order. The practical first. I do not want to leave this country. I do not want the documents you offered me. I want to remain in this city, and I want to do it in my own name, in a place that belongs to me. Not to you. Not arranged by you. I will accept your help in finding it. I will not accept your money to pay for it. I have a piece of property arriving in my name within 14 days. I will sell it. I will live on the proceeds while I rebuild a working life. I would like to begin translating again. I would like Renske, if she is willing, to help me set up correctly the things I do not yet know how to set up. I will pay her. He listened without moving. When she had finished, he waited. She took the breath. The not practical. I do not know what you are to me yet. I know that you have done, in 17 days, the thing my husband did not do in 6 years. You have looked at me. You have waited for me to look back. You have not asked me to make myself smaller in order for you to feel larger, and I have lived long enough now in rooms with men to understand what a rare and difficult thing that is. I am not in a position to give you anything tonight. I may not be in a position to give you anything for some time. What I can do is sit in this chair, in this library, on the mornings when you are free, and let myself be known by you, slowly, the way a person is known when neither person is in a hurry. If you can wait, I would like that. If you cannot, I would understand. The fire moved in the hearth. Aurelio set down the cup he had been holding. He looked at her for a long, steady moment. There was only attention. There was only a man, 50 years old, who had spent 30 of those years in rooms where attention was a currency he had been careful never to spend, choosing now, deliberately, to spend it. I have been waiting, he said quietly, since the night you walked into this house with a coffee mug wrapped in a sweater. I will continue to wait. There is no rush, Lyric. There has never been a rush. It was the first time he had said her given name aloud. She felt it land somewhere beneath her ribs. She did not cry. She had not cried since the night of the pear in the white bowl. She simply nodded and rose and walked across the library to the window and stood with her back to him, watching the cedars in the cold morning light. After a moment, she heard him stand and walk to the window beside her and stand there, not touching her, just standing there. That was all that happened, that morning. It was enough. 14 months later, Lyric Vasco stood at the front of a small room above a bookstore on Halverson Street. The room was full. 50 folding chairs, every chair occupied. Several women standing along the back wall. She had founded, in the 8 months previous, a small organization with no name on its door and no presence on the public registers. An organization Renske ran from a back office that answered to women who had found themselves in the 72-hour window Lyric had once stood inside alone. Some had been left. Some had escaped. Some were, as Renske once put it, in the act of escaping, but did not yet know it. The card that had once been pressed into Lyric's palm in a powder room over 4 years ago now existed, in slight variations, in the powder rooms and pockets and hollowed-out novels of women across 4 cities. The number rang at the desk Renske had set up in a building Lyric owned outright, having sold the property in the younger woman's name within the promised 14 days, and reinvested the proceeds with a care her husband had never invested in anything in his life. She had not spoken Calder Halloran's name aloud in 11 months. She did not miss it. She had finished, that summer, her first major translation in 7 years, a Portuguese novel about a woman who walks out of a marriage and into a city she has not been told the name of. It had been well received because Lyric had translated it with the authority of a woman who had walked the same corridor herself. She had not married Aurelio. She did not know yet whether she ever would. He had a key to her apartment. She had a key to the house in the Cedars. He had never, in 14 months, asked her to be smaller. She had never, in 14 months, found it necessary to ask him not to. Honora Yarrowfield had died in February, in Sao. She had left a curious bequest, a small trust, to be administered at the discretion of Miss Lyric Vasco, on the understanding that she will know what to do with it. Lyric had used it to buy the building above the bookstore. The room was full this evening because Lyric had been asked to speak. She had agreed only because the women in the room were women who had sat, themselves, on the edges of $41 motel beds, and she had not forgotten what it was like to dial a number with a hand that you could not yet decide whether to call steady or trembling. Renske sat in the front row. Aurelio did not. He never came to these. He had said, the first time she had asked him, "These rooms belong to you. I will not stand at the back of them." Lyric stepped to the front. The room quieted. She did not have notes. "My name is Lyric Vasco. 15 months ago, I sat on a kitchen floor in a house that turned out not to be mine, holding a coffee mug from a country I had loved with the wrong man, and I understood that I had let someone do something to me that I was not going to let anyone do to me again. I did not know yet what not letting was going to look like. I did not know what tools I had. I did not know that there were rooms in this city, that there are rooms in every city, in which women have been quietly handing other women cards for longer than any of us have been alive. I am here tonight because I was given a card. I am standing in this room because I dialed the number. I am speaking to you because I want you to understand, before you leave this evening, that the woman you used to be is not lost. She is sitting on a kitchen floor somewhere inside you, holding a coffee mug, and she has been waiting for you to come back for her. The work of the rest of your life is to go and get her. I will help you. The women in this room will help you. You will not do it alone. You will do it. And one day, perhaps a year from now, perhaps less, you will walk into a room you are not invited to, and you will say what you came to say, and the room will go quiet around your sentence, and you will understand, finally, that there is no one in any room left in your life who can take from you what you have taken back. The room was quiet. Renske, in the front row, lowered her eyes the way she lowered her eyes when she did not want the room to see what was on her face. Lyric stepped down. She walked to the back. She put on her mother's plum coat. She walked down the narrow stairs and out into the cold of Halverson Street, where the street lamps had just come on, and at the curb a black, expensively quiet car was waiting for her, with a man in the back seat who did not lean across to open the door because he had learned, 14 months earlier, that she preferred to open her own. She opened the door. She got in. Aurelio looked at her in the dim light, the way he had looked at her in the foyer the night of the gala. "How is the room?" "Full," she said. Of course it was. The car pulled away from the curb, and somewhere across the city, in apartments and motels and houses with kitchens that did not yet feel like kitchens, women were sitting on floors holding mugs from countries they had loved with the wrong men, and one of them, this evening, was lifting a card she had hidden inside the pages of a book and reading the number in the lamplight and dialing. Lyric leaned her head, very lightly, against the shoulder of the man beside her. The city moved past the windows. She was no longer the woman in the mirror. She was the room the mirror had been waiting to show her.